and we're going to talk about elegy. An elegy is often a sad poem that discusses death, but ends with some sort of comfort. A poem of serious reflection, typically in honor of the dead. So an elegy is a little dark, but so was the poem we just read, right? It has to do with death, but oftentimes, provides some sort of like light at the end of the tunnel. Is usually not too dark. So the elegy that I have chosen for us today is called Playground Elegy by Clint Smith. This is not set to music, so I'm just going to read it one time through, and then I'll go back and I'll read it again and talk about the different questions on the right-hand side. So, Playground Elegy. The first time I slid down a slide, my mother told me to hold my hands in towards the sky. Something about gravity, weight distribution, and feeling the air ripple through your fingers. I remember reaching the bottom, smile consuming half of my face, hands still in the air because I didn't want it to stop. Ever since, this defiance of gravity has always been synonymous with feeling alive. When I read of the new child, his body strewn across the street, a casket of bones and concrete, I wonder how many times he slid down the slide, how many times he defied gravity to answer a question in class. Did he raise his hands for all of them? Does my mother regret this? That she raised a black boy growing up to think that raised hands made me feel more alive, that raised hands meant I was alive, that raised hands meant I would live. Okay, so again, let's just take a minute, think about this poem, right? It begins with a description of a young boy going down a slide, right? And how his mom always told him to put his hands up, right? I'm sure if we've ever been down a slide, I mean, I personally have, I also put my hands up, okay? And how this feeling of putting your hands up feels like being alive. The poem then goes on and transitions a little bit in the second half, and it talks about a different child who has been killed, right? Who is dead on the street, and how, when you are interacting with the police, you're told to put your hands up. That's the first thing that they tell you, right? And there's an idea that if you put your hands up, they can see that you are unarmed, and then they will not use excessive force in arresting you or confronting you. However, at the end of this poem, right, the author is insinuating that even though young black boys are putting their hands up, that's not always stopping them from dying, right? That, your mother teaches you to put your hands up so that you can live and feel alive, when in reality, right, that's not always the case. So, on the right-hand side, the first thing it asks you to do is to choose a color and then draw a shape that you feel best describes the first half of the poem. Okay, an example, and this is not how I feel reading this half of the poem, but just to show you, is I could do a pink star. I could do a yellow, I don't care if you do a sun, you have a lot of freedom in what it is you draw here. But I want you to be really purposeful in the color that you choose and whatever image it is that you decide to draw. Okay, again, the star and the sun are not how I feel about this first half of the poem. So I'm going to reread the first half of the poem, give you a minute to draw it, and then I'll read the second half of the poem and give you a minute to repeat that process. So again, for this first half, you're choosing the best color and shape that you feel represent the meaning of this poem. The first time I slid down a slide, my mother told me to hold my hands in towards the sky. Something about gravity, weight distribution, and feeling the air ripple through your fingers. I remember reaching the bottom, smile consuming half of my face, hands still in the air because I didn't want it to stop. Ever since, this defiance of gravity has always been synonymous with feeling alive. So, take a minute, choose a color, and then use it to draw a shape that you feel best describes that first half of the poem. Okay? Also, feel free to pause the video. Then, we have the second half of the poem. When I read of the new child, his body strewn across the street, a casket of bones and concrete, I wonder how many times he slid down the slide, how many times he defied gravity to answer a question class. Did he raise his hands for all of them? Does my mother regret this? That she raised a black boy growing up to think that raised hands made me feel more alive. That raised hands meant I was alive. That raised hands meant I would live. So again, you're going to choose a color. Again, be purposeful in whatever color it is you choose. And then use that color to draw a shape that you feel best describes this second half of the poem. Once you've drawn your two shapes up here, what I would like you to then do is, again, choose a color and a shape to describe how you as a reader feel about this poem. Once you've drawn your image, then I would like you to briefly explain your choices, all in this little box. Okay? I have a couple of comprehension questions for you over here. The first is, how is this poem an elegy? Be specific. Look at the definition, right? And then explain how this poem fits into that criteria. Then, both the Ballad of Birmingham and Playground Elegy include examples of situational irony. To do a quick recap, situational irony is when the opposite of what you think is going to happen happens. Okay? When the opposite of what you expect happens. So, go back and look at the Ballad of Birmingham. What might be ironic about that situation? Look at Playground Elegy. What might be ironic about this poem? Okay? And then lastly, both poems focus on losing one's innocence. And to lose your innocence, basically think about Lord of the Flies, right? Those boys were all happy-go-lucky boys, and as soon as they landed on that island, they had to grow up. So, think about these two poems. At what point in these two poems does the child involved lose their innocence, right? Think about that. Be specific. If possible, I would like you to pull a line or two from the poem and kind of use it to reinforce your opinion, okay? But in what way does the narrator in Playground Elegy lose his innocence? Okay? Email me if you have any questions. You've got this.